Hi to all of you members and friends of the First Presbyterian Church of New Canaan tuning into the Tidings podcast for Friday, March 14th. I can hardly believe that 5 years ago yesterday, our world was turned upside down and inside mainly because of the COVID virus. I'll never forget how at a men's breakfast meeting on Wednesday, March 11th in the year 2020 in the Theater of the American Church in Paris, we decided at first to continue with our planned men's retreat that was coming up that weekend. But then one of our members, Tom Wilscombe, said he was concerned not about himself, but about his wife, Kim, who had multiple sclerosis. Would the concerns about the virus people were talking about at the time in the news affect her? And in that moment, that morning, it became clear to me that we would need to take a more conservative approach to any future activities until we knew more. It was clear that we needed to protect the most vulnerable ones of our church family, to think about their needs first. Reuters news agency on March 13th had the headline, "President Trump declares coronavirus national emergency and says he will most likely be tested." At that time, President Trump cautioned that Americans will have to make sacrifices and change their daily practices, a stark difference from 2 weeks ago when he said people should use common sense but otherwise not change their routines. He said it could get worse. The next 8 weeks will be critical. While shaking hands freely with the gathered business executives that he was meeting with, the 73-year-old President Trump later acknowledged he expected to be tested for the virus. He had come into contact with a Brazilian official last Saturday, he said, who later tested positive for coronavirus. And on that Friday, March 13th, the French government declared that people should be advised the city would go on a lockdown of quarantine and limited travel as of Tuesday, March 17th. Our staff at the American Church in Paris had to decide quickly. And we did. We decided that we should not wait, and so had 2 days to get the word out to our community, who had 3 services every Sunday and averaged between 600 to 700 people in worship each weekend, that we would not be worshiping together in the sanctuary, but rather go to online worship. Which meant also that in those 2 days we would have to figure out how to produce a pre-recorded online worship service that would be accessible as of 9 a.m. online on Sunday, March 15th. It was crazy. And we guessed that this would be a temporary situation, or at least that's what we hoped. Some of us thought this would be maybe a month or two, but that was on March 15th, 2020. We guessed wrongly and had no idea that it would last until 2021. In Connecticut, there were 982,973 reported COVID cases and 11,034 deaths. In the United States, totally, there were, as reported, 111,820,082 reported COVID cases and 1,219,487 deaths recorded. Worldwide, the coronavirus death toll is reported to be over 7 million. I remember that when Kim and I arrived in New Canaan in August of 2020, our first 2 weeks were spent at home in a required quarantine for any newcomers from out of town. It was strange. It was surreal to try to have worship services outside while the weather was warm, and then go to online worship for months. We had an outside Christmas Eve service singing carols around the Christmas tree, but then so-called live broadcast services online only for the family service, and later more traditional communion service at 10 p.m. And I got to know many of our congregation members only via a phone call or on various Zoom calls that first year. We had to make painful decisions about when to open and when to close, when to do services online and when to finally resume public worship in the sanctuary, when to require masks and when to make masks optional. Those were heartbreaking and trying times, and I often thought of Kim with MS back in Paris and how the basis for any of our decisions should not be my own personal opinion or sense of being welfare on what was best, but what was best for the most vulnerable in our midst. And I can't tell you how thankful I am that we are 5 years from the outbreak of that pandemic. but strangely under the same president again, facing other challenges that threaten our community life and well-being in this Lenten season. Are we still concerned with how to make decisions considering what is best for the most vulnerable in our midst? It's a question that yet lingers in my mind. In talking with colleagues in our presbytery at a recent meeting, we share that there are Latin community members who are really afraid to leave their homes right now and minimize going out even to buy groceries. And then another vulnerable community is the LGBTQ community. Transgender people have recently been airbrushed out of governmental recognition by an executive order. I try to imagine what it must feel like not to have a category anymore to affirm my actual identity. Just because a fairly narrow group of people are uncomfortable with transgender folk and identity, that doesn't mean they don't exist. And if they exist, shouldn't they be protected by the same human rights that a straight white person in this country would expect? Or have their rights just been taken away by saying that they no longer exist? I don't know, but this uncertainty and the way things seem to be going is troubling to me. St. Patrick's Day is on Monday, and I know we mainly think various shades of green and beer and parades around St. Patrick's Day. But St. Patrick was also a slave at one point in his life, and his experience gave him a strong love for those yet enslaved by tribal thinking. And so when he was set free, he determined to go back to Ireland and share his faith, the faith in Jesus Christ, with different clans. Whoever would listen to him and the story of God's love as revealed in the words and deeds of Jesus. His technique was something we might consider. He and his colleagues would set up camp near one of the Celtic tribes they encountered, and they would spend time living, working, playing, teaching, and sharing the story of God's love in any way they could. And if St. Patrick thought that there was openness to the faith, then he would leave one of his colleagues to stay and continue to live and teach about Jesus. That's how Christianity was introduced to the Irish. So it got me thinking, how might God be calling us to come alongside those in need to know about the love of God? Those outsiders that are here in our midst and not as far away as you might think could probably benefit by people standing in solidarity with them. This Sunday after worship, we've invited Building One Community, a nonprofit that works with immigrants and refugees, to come and speak to us about the current changes in U.S. immigration policy and how we as a community are impacted, and possibly how we can come alongside our neighbors who are living in fear with the current ICE policies and activities that threaten their very existence. I hope you'll come and listen and learn. Because part of our Lenten journey means working on our inner lives, cultivating a deeper relationship with God. But another part of our Lenten journey means working on our relationships with one another and our neighbors. Feed your spirit, feed your mind, feed your neighbor is a simple way to think about it. Fasting from anything that keeps us from loving God and our neighbor and being filled with that which truly satisfies our souls and brings new life for all. One of my favorite poems and writers over the years has been Madeleine L'Engle. And recently I read her poem for Lent, 1966, and want to share it with you. She writes, "It is my Lent to break my Lent, to eat when I would fast, to know when slender strength is spent, take shelter from the blast when I would run with wind and rain, to sleep when I would watch. It is my Lent to smile at pain, but not ignore its touch. It is my Lent to listen well when I would be alone, to talk when I would rather dwell in silence, turn from none who call on me, to try to see that's what is truly meant is not my choice. If Christ's I'd be, it's thus I'll keep my Lent. It's thus I'll keep my Lent with you." Thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you on Sunday.